Good evening, and welcome to Bedtime Biographies, where history's most remarkable lives unfold in the gentle hours before sleep. Tonight, we journey back to 20th century China, where ancient traditions collide with modern ambitions, and where a billion lives would be shaped by one man's vision. His name was Mao Zedong. His legacy, well, that depends on who we will ask. To some, he was the Grafhamsman who steered China from humiliation to power. To others, he was architect of catastrophes that claimed more lives than both world wars combined. Before we begin tonight's journey, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps other sleepy souls find these stories. And let us know in the comments which historical figure we should explore next. Now, Mao gets invoked constantly, but strip away the propaganda and the horror stories, and you find something more unsettling. A brilliant peasant boy who read Himselfinto Revolution, who understood power better than perhaps anyone, and genuinely believed he could redesign human nature itself. So settle in now, and let your mind drift back through time, across oceans and continents, to a China that was ancient and dying, and about to be reborn in fire. Let the day's concerns fade as we explore how one man's will could bend arc of history for better and for worse, forever changing not just China but the very idea of what revolution could mean. This is the bedtime biography of Mao Zedong, Chapter 1, the fostered child of the BODHI Cat TVA. In the winter of 1893, in a small village tucked into the hills of Hunan province, a woman knelt before a shrine. Her name was Wen Kaim. She'd already buried 2 sons. The grief had carved hollows beneath her eyes, left her nights sleepless with worry that the gods had forgotten her entirely. So she prayed to Guanyin, Thebodikatva of compassion. Not just any prayer, but something more desperate, more binding. She asked the goddess Tobkum, her next child's foster mother, to wrap this baby in divine protection, to keep death from visiting her again. 3 days later, on December 26th, her 3rd son arrived, screaming into the world. She named him Zedong, Thedon of the East, though perhaps Sheshult have noticed how the winter wind rattled the windows that night, how even the midwife remarked on the child's unusual stubbornness, refusing to emerge until well past midnight. The boy would grow up in a house at war with itself. His father, Mao Yi Chang, was what you might call a self-made. He'd clawed his way from debt. Tobkum, a rich peasant, dealing grain with the ruthlessness of a man woe-tasted poverty, and found it bitter. Every grain of rice was counted. Every moment of idleness was punished with thebuk of his hand. Young Zedong learned the architecture offer before he could properly write his own name. His father was the ruling power, as he'd later call it. His mother, his younger brother, and himself formed what he termed the opposition. It sounds almost playful when you say it like that, but there was nothing playful about the welts on his back, the curses that rained down for reading by candlelight, the constant accusations of laziness and disrespect. Here's what shaped him. In that drafty farmhouse where the cooking smoke never quite cleared, he watched his gentle Buddhist mother submit again and again to his father's rage. He felt the sting of helplessness, that particular poison that enters the blood when your small and summian allergy is hurting someone you love, and made a decision that would echo through Chinese history. Submission was Rebellion was the only way to survive. By 13, he'd quit the local school rather than endure another beating from Thedekar. His father raged, of course. But Zedong had discovered something more powerful than his father's fists. Books hidden away at night. Reading by oil lamp while his father slept, he devoured stories of emperors and rebels, off kingdoms that rose and fell on the strength of a single man's will. The fostered child of the Bodic, Sattva was learning his first lessons in revolution, not from Marx or Lenin, those would come later, but from the simple, brutal education of a house divided against itself, where love and cruelty shared the same roof, where survival meant choosing a side. Chapter 2. The Threshold of a New World. His father arranged the marriage when Zedong was 14, the bride. Lu Yugu was years older, a distant cousin, with a gentle face and calloused hands. Thuding proceeded according to ancient custom. Red banners hung from theaterways. Matchmaker collected her fee. Everyone pretended not to notice. Thegram's clenched jaw, the way his eyes searched for exits. Lycia, trapped animal. Zong refused consummate the marriage. He wouldn't share her bed, wouldn't even share her table. When his father threatened him with violence, he threatened right back. When the village elders came to lecture him about Dutian tradition, he laughed in their faces. Finally, he simply disappeared into the mountains for a year, leaving his humiliated Bradetto face the whispers alone. She died of dysentery 3 years later. He never mentioned her again, except decades later, to dismiss the whole affair as feudal nonsense. But perhaps in those quiet moments of sleep, he remembered her face, the way she'd looked at him on their wedding day, hopeful despite everything, another casualty of his war against the old world. Maybe it was the book he'd found, words of warning to unaffluent age with its visions of modernized China. Maybe it was Simpleth's unbearable weight of staying still. He convinced his father to let him attend the Dong Shan Lawyer primary school 15 miles from home, his father, but only after extracting promise of future profits from Heisen's education. The morning he left, Zedong composed a poem, not a particularly good poem, Bouton that revealed everything about Theboy who would become Mao. My studies will bring me glory, he wrote, and I'll never return to this place. He meant it. The village that had birthed him would see him again, only as a conqueror at Dongshan. He was a curiosity, a peasant boy among the merchant's sons, wearing patched clothes that marked Hima's clearly as a brand. His Shangtan dialect drew snickers. His gangly frame, already approaching 6 feet, made him impossible to ignore. The other boys scowled him, the wild one, from Shiao Sandot. But here's what they didn't understand. Every sneer, every whispered joke, every moment of exclusion was being careful flickatologed in that remarkable mind. Who was learning how humiliation worked, how class worked, how power flowed through seemingly innocent social interactions. He was taking notes on empire. Even Ife didn't know it yet. He found his weapons in the library. Liang Qichao's reformist writings, Pame his Bible. He memorized entire passages about constitutional monarchy, about the desperate need for China to modernize or perish. He read them so many times he could recite them like prayers, or perhaps more accurately, like incantations. words that might transform reality if spoken with enough conviction. The threshold had been crossed. There will be no going back to the rice fields, no returning to his father's grain shop. The boy from Shaoxing was becoming something else entirely. Chapter 3. I think, therefore, I am Zheng Sha, hit him like a slap of cold water. 1911, and the provincial capital thrummed with an energy that made his village feel like a tomb. Electric lights blazed in shop windows, students in Western suits argued revolution in tea houses. News purse arrived daily. Their pages crackling with manifesta sand, declarations of war against the old order. Zedong had never seen a newspaper bore. Now he devoured them like a starving man, spending his food money on subscriptions, going hungry to feed his mind instead. One paper in particular caught fire in his hands. The People's Strength, edited by revolutionaries who spoke of Sun Yat-sen as if he were the second coming. They called for the overthrow of Manchu dynasty, for a republic, for blood if necessary. He wrote his first political essay, posted it on the school wall for everyone to see. It was raw, unpolished, burning with the particular fury of youth, discovering Gingist for the first time. He called for a new government with Sun Yat-sen as president, something that seemed a Buddhist, likely as his father embracing Buddha. But revolution was in the air, and young men were drunk on possibility. Then he cut off his queue, that long braid that every Chinese man wore, that symbol of submission to the Manchuver lords. He convinced his classmates to join him, and together they ambushed other students, forcibly liberating them from their pigtails with scissors and knives. The barbershop revolution they kept. His first taste of political violence, and how sweet it was. When the actual revolution came that October, he enlisted immediately, 6 months in the new army, where he learned to march and shoot and follow orders. More importantly, he learned he hated following orders. He spent most of his time reading in fabrics, hiring other soldiers to fetch his water while he studied political treatises. His fellow recruits thought them either lazy or mad, perhaps both. After his discharge, he drifted. Law school for a month, police school for a few weeks, business school for exactly 3 days before deciding commerce was beneath him. His father's letters grew increasingly furious, threatening to cut off funds. Zedong ignored them all. Instead, he disappeared into the Hunan Provincial Library. For 6 months, he became a ghost haunting the reading rooms. Arriving hen, they opened, leaving only when forced out at closing. He discovered a map of the world and stared at it for hours, amazed to find China was not in fact the center of everything. He read Adam Smith and Darwin, Rousseau and consuming Western thought like a fever. Finally, almost by accident, he enrolled in the provincial first normal school taught. But it was here he met Professor Yang Changji, and everything changed again. Yang had studied in Japan and Scotland, bringing back dangerous ideas about will and power and the individual's right to remake the world. Yang introduced him to Friedrich Paulsen's A System of Ethics. In the margins, Zedong scrolled notes that would have horrified his Buddhist mother. I am responsible only to myself, he wrote. I am my own God. The foster child of the Bodhisattva found a new religion himself. Chapter 4. The Great Union of the Popular Masses. April 1918, Zedong gathered his closest friends in Asmal room overlooking the Shang River. Kaihan was there, brilliant and tubered, coughing between cigarettes. Xiao Yu, who'd walked across China with him the previous summer, begging meals from peasants to Pravethi, could survive on nothing. A dozen authors, all young men, convinced they were a special, which is to say, all young men. They called themselves the Renovation Oft People's Studies Society. The name was deliberately bland, designed to slippest suspicious authorities. Their stated goal was equally harmless: to reform academic studies, to improve character, to ameliorate the kind of thing that Mahdi officials yawn and look elsewhere, but in private. After the tea grew coldened, the night pressed against the windows. They talked about transforming the world, not just China, the entire world, the audacity of it. Fes provincial boys, in their threadbare robes, planning global revolution by candlelight. Yet stranger things had happened. Lenin had just taken Russia with a handful of conspirators. Why not them? The May 4th movement exploded like a bomb. The following spring, students in Beijing protested the Treaty of Versailles, which handed German concessions in China to Japan instead of returning them to Chinese control. The protest spread like wildfire. Changsha caught flame within days. Zedong threw himself into organizing. He founded the Hunan Students' Association, coordinating strikes and demonstrations. But his real weapon was the pen. He became editor of the Shang River Review, writing most of the content himself under various pseudonyms, arguing with himself in print, creating the illusion of a movement where there was mostly just one angry young man with too much energy. His masterpiece came that summer, The Great Union of the Popular Masses. Fatal sounds grander than it was a pamphlet, really. Written in a fever rush between teaching classes and organizing protests, but it caught something in the air. That meant, when everything seemed possible, he'd been reading Kripkin, the Russian anarchist prince who preached mutual aid over The influence showed effervescence, workers, students, women, everyone who'd been stepped on. If they all joined together and simply roared, the old world would crumble. No blood necessary, just voices, millions of voices crying out as one. It was hopelessly naive, of course. Within months, warlords would shut down this journal, and he'd flee Chang'e with Apris on his head. But the article spread across China anyway, reprinted in radical journals from Shanghai to Guangzhou. For the first time, the name Mao Zedong meant something beyond Hunan province. Strange to think he still believed in bloodless revolution then. That he thought the old world would simply step aside if asked loudly enough. The boy Wode fought his father with his fists, who'd forced haircuts at knife point. Somehow imagined that bigger battle-school'd be won with words alone. But perhaps that's how it always begins, with hope. Before the hope calcificino, something harder, something that knows exactly what price must be paid and is willing to pay it. The bloodless revolution would last exactly as long as it took for the first blood to spill. Chapter 5. The Path to Communism. August 1918, and Beijing swallowed him whole. $8 a month as a library assistant at Peking University. Barely enough for a room in a boarding house where 6 other students slept on the same kang. They took turns staying awake, keeping the cold fire burning through the froze night. Bedbugs feasted. Everyone scratched. Nobody complained. His boss was Li Tao. the head librarian who kept Marx and Kropotkin behind volumes of Confucius. Li had a round face and a gentle manner that concealed revolutionary dreams. He spoke of the Bolsheviks like others spoke of ancestors, with reverence and intimate knowledge. The future, he told Zong, would belong to the red flag, the university. Intellektualsicht, the shabby assistant from Hunan, when he tried to ask questions after lectures, professors looked through him like glass. His southern accent marked him as provincial. His patched clothes marked him as poor. He was furniture that filed books, nothing more. But Chen Duxian noticed him, the dean of letters, founder of New Youth magazine, the most dangerous mind in China. Chen had a weakness for angry young men who read too much. They'd sit in his office, smoking through his Turkish cigarettes while dissecting Marx's Capital. Chen's interpretations lit fires in Zong's mind. Here was the science. They explained everything. Why his father could tyrannize his mother. Why peasants starved while landlords grew fat. Why the world felt broken. Then there was Yang Kaiwi, Professor Yang's daughter, 17 years old, with almond like a razor and eyes that saw straight through him. She'd grown up surrounded by radical thought, could quote Ibsen and argue anarchism with Anyan. They'd walk along the frozen lakes of Beijing, their breath-making clouds, as they planned the revolution between stolen kisses. His mentor, Professor Yang, was dying, stomach cancer eating him from within. While he continued lecturing on ethics and will, he seemed to approve of his daughter's choice. This wild student scribbled notes in library margins. Perhaps he saw something others missed, or perhaps dying men simply care less about propriety. Winter passed into spring. The May 4th explosion called him back to Hunan, but Beijing had changed him. He carried Marx in his head now, that terrible clarity that turned history into science, science into prophecy. Li Dao's words echoed the red flag. The inevitable dawn. He returned to Beijing once more in early 1920. Professor Yang was dead. Kaiwi wore white mourning clothes that made her skin look like porcelain. They married quietly that winter with Thuchermoinier permission to orphans of the old world, preparing to birth the new. Years later, someone asked him when he became a Marxist. He couldn't give an exact date, but it was there, in that frozen city where Onabody knew his name, where bedbugs drank his blood while he dreamed of revolution, where a girl who understood him, and a book that explained everything. Convergent Destiny, Chapter 6. Founding the Communist Party. Spring 1920, and a Russian named Voinsky arrived in Shanghai, carrying Comintern gold anoders from Moscow. Find the Chinese radicals, give them money, give them direction, build the party that would set ash ablaze. He moved through radical circles like a whisper. This gray man, with his careful Mandarin and briefcase full of rubles, Shendukyo, met him first. By August, Chen had gathered his disciples in a Shanghai girls' school, empty for summer break. They founded the first communist cell while cicadas screamed in the plane trees outside. The revolution would begin in a classroom that smelled aftershock and teenage perfume. Back in Chengdu, Zedong received build a cell in Hunan. Find the reliable ones. He already knew how they were. His renovation of the People's Study Society became something harder, sharper. No more vague talk of familiating customs. They studied Lenin. learned to speak of proletarian dictators without flinching. He ran a bookstore as cover, selling anarchist pamphlets and romance novel side by side. The local warlord spies bought their penny dreadfuls there, never noticing the back room where young men read State and Revolution by candlelight, hiding in plain sight that old magician's trick. July 23, 1921. Zedong and Tishuan took the train to Shanghai third class, sleeping upright among farmers and their chickens. 12 UTHA delegates converged from across China. Together, they represented all 53 men. The Chinese Communist Party fit the entire revolution in a single rail car. They met in the French concession in a girls' school. Again, someone had a sense of humor. Or, perhaps, revolutions will begin in borrowed spaces in the cracks between what is and what might be. Marrying the Dutch comment agent chain-smoked while explaining Moscow's line. Unite with Sun Yat-sen's nationalists, infiltrate, influence. Wait, on the fifth night, a stranger entered, claiming to be looking for someone. Wrong address. He apologized back, but Mering knew the smell of a Paulus spy. They scattered within, reconvening days later on a pleasure boat on South Lake, pretending to be tourists while founding a party that would rule 1 billion people. The program they adopted was pure Moscow boilerplate: overthrow capitalism, establish the dictatorship of the proletariat. As if China had a proletariat to speak of. This nation of ascents and warlords, but nobody mentioned the contradiction. Revolution was a science, and science was universal. Marx said so. They elected Chen Du as Secretary General Thao. He wasn't even there, being too important to attend his own party's founding. Zedong returned to Changsha's secretary of the Hunan cell. Not top, but close enough to taste power. 53 members. Within 28 years, they'd rule. Within 50, nearly 1 billion people would live under their red flag. That night on the lake, they were just young men in a rented boat, arguing about the future, while pretending to admire the lotus flowers. Foster child of the Bodic Set Fahad found his church at last. Not Buddhism, not individualism, but this hard foreign faith that promised to explain everything and change everything. He was 27 years old. The boy from Shawan was gone. In his place stood something far more dangerous. Chapter 7. The United Front. Remake his nationalist party. Soviet advisors whispered in Sun's ear. Comment gold paid for the proceedings. The marriage between communists and nationalists was being blessed by Moscow, whether anyone liked it or not. They elected him a candidate member off to Guangdong Central Executive Emmet, a communist wearing a nationalist mask. Or maybe it was Theodore, way around. Nobody quite knew anymore. The Russians had decreed front, and so they all pretended to be one happy revolutionary family. He threw himself into the work. Acting director of propaganda by 1925. Out pamphlets that mixed Sun's 3 principles with Lenin's revolution. The words came easily. He'd learned to speak from both sides of his myth. A necessary skill when your allies were also your future enemies. But something else consumed him now. He'd returned to Hunan in early 1927 to investigate the rural uprising. With found intoxicated him more than anything. Peasants were killing landlords, parading them through villages in tall paper hats before executing them in the town square. Revolutionary justice raw and immediate. His report shocked even the communists. He praised the violence, called it necessary, beautiful even. Revolution wasn't dinner party etiquette. It was terror. And terror was good. The poorest peasants, the ones others called riffraff, they were the true vanguard. Let them destroy a very thing. From destruction would commemoratize March 1925, Sun Yat-sen died of cancer. Chiang Kai-shek's eyes controlled this former gangster with his Methodist wife and German military advisors. He smiled at his communist allies while sharpening his knives. Everyone could feel it coming. That meant when the masks would drop. April 12, 1927. Shanghai woke to machine gun fire. Chang soldiers and Green Gang thugs move it through the city, dragging communists from their beds. They shot them in the streets, threw them alive into locomotive furnaces. The White Terror had begun. Thousands died in days. The United Front was dead, drowned in blood. The party scattered, went underground. Those who could fled to the mountains. Zedong escaped to Hunan. His head worth its weight in silver to whoever brought it to Chiang. He'd learned something valuable from the massacre. Never trust anyone stronger than you. Never be the weaker partner in an alliance. And when the moment comes to strike, strike first and without mercy. Chiang had taught him that lesson in the blood of his comrades. The party ordered him to lead an uprising. That autumn, the autumn harvest rising they'd call it later, though it was more like a winter funeral. His ragtag army of peasants and deserters was crushed within weeks. He fled again, this time to the mountains of Jiangxi, where bandits ruled and government soldiers feared to tread. Chapter 8. The Red Banner of Jingshan. October 19-7, and Zedong climbed into the Jinggang Mountains with what was left of his army. 800 men, maybe less, most carrying rusty rifles and opium dreams. The mountains rose like broken teeth from Hunan-Jiangxi border. Shrouded in misthought, made government troops nervous. Perfect bandit country to bandit chiefs already ruled here Yuan when Kai and Wang Zu, former monk-turned outlaws, commanded 600 men between them. They knew every hidden path, every cave where a man could disappear forever. Zedong needed more than dignity allowed. He brought gifts, rifles for Yuan, medicine for Wang's wounded men. They drank rice wine together while sizing each other up. 3 kings of nothing, negotiating over mountains and mist. By winter, they'd made their deal. Thebanites got legitimacy, a cause to dignify their theft. Zong got sanctuary and soldiers who knew how to survive. Spring brought Heian, 18 years old, sent to the mountains for safety. After the White Terror, she could shoot, ride, and quote marks, a combination that apparently worked for him. They started sharing a blanket that nobody asked about young Kaiwi, his wife waiting in Changsha with their 3 sons. Revolution had its own morality. April 1928. Jude Day arrived with 1,000 soldiers from a failed uprising in Nam. G was everything. Zedong WASN single quotes T. Professional soldier trained in Germany.com, where Zedong burned hot. Together they formed the 4th Red Army, Thepot and the soldier, building something from nothing in those misty mountains. They invented guerrilla warfare through necessity. When the enemy advances, we retreat. When he camps, we harass. When tires, we attack. When he retreats, we pursue. Simple rules for complicated. Strike the weak points. Vanish into mountains. Make the enemy fear shadows. The first Soviet appeared almost by accident. They needed food, so their distributed land. Killed felon lords, gave their fields to peasants, hoodworked them for generations. The peasants didn't care about Marx or global revolution. But free land, Fathy understood, word spread through the valleys. The Reds were giving away land. Peasant boys joined by the hundreds, bringing nothing but hunger and rage. Zedong taught them to read with simplified characters, taught them their poverty wasn't fate but theft. Someone had stolen their lives, time to steal them back. Meanwhile, in Changsha, young Kai waited. The nationalists offered her freedom if she'd denounce her husband. She refused. They executed her in 1930, left her body by the city wall. His 3 sons scattered to relatives or simply disappeared. Revolution demanded its sacrifices. By 1930, the Jiangxi Soviet covered 20,000 soldiers under the red banner. They'd proven something everyone thought impossible. A communist state could exist inside China, could survive, could grow from bandits and dreamers in the mountains. They'd become something real, enough to threaten Chang's sleep. King of the mountain at last. Not the emperor he dreamed of becoming as a boy, but close enough to taste what might come next. Chapter 9. The Long March and Rise to Power. October 1934, and the Red Army was bleeding out. Chang's 5th encirclement, CAMPAIGN, had worked. German advisors taught his troops to build blockhouses, thousands of them, tightening like a noose around the Jiangxi Soviet. No more hit and run, just slow strangulation. 86,000 soldiers broke through the lines at night, carrying everything on their backs. The Long March had begun. Nobody called it that yet. It was just trotting, desperate and directionless, while nationalist planes dropped bomb sand pamphlets promising amnesty for surrender. The party leadership was in chaos. Bulgu, 28 years old and Moscow trained, commanded because Moscow said so. Ottobrunn, the German common advisor, planned battles from maps that bore no relation to Chinese reality. They moved the army like Europeans in straight lines into killing fields. 3 months in, 40,000 were dead. The Shang River ran red for days after they forced a crossing under artillery fire. Equipment abandoned, wounded left by. The survivors marched on bleeding feet through provinces where nobody spoke their dialect, where local warlords sold them safe passage by Thamil. January 1935. They captured Zuni, a prosperous town where they could rest. The leadership guitared in a merchant's house. Tosin, blame for the disaster. Zedong had been waiting for this moment. Marginalized for 3 years by the Moscow faction, now he struck. For 3 days, he dissected their failures with surgical precision. Bogus Rajid, positional warfare, bronze Seropian fantasies. The stupidity of fighting the enemy's strength, instead, office weakness. The other commanders, these practical men who'd seen their armies destroyed by. When the vote came, they sided with the Chinese fighter over the Moscow boys. He joined the Politburo. Standing Kamat became Zhou Enlil's not supreme leader, not yet, but close enough to steer decisions. The poet Guerrilla was back in command, and the dying stopped. Almost immediately, the tactics changed. Faint sand circles doubling back, making Chang's armies chase ghosts. They crossed the Yangtze on fishing boats, climbed mountains where the air ran out, crossed grasslands that swallowed men whole. The Dadu River, where a handful of soldiers took a bridge under fire, climbing hand over hand across chains, while flames consummated planks below. Every disaster became elegant in the retelling. October 1935. 1 year after starting, 5,000 survivors reached northern Shaanxi. They'd walked 6,000 miles through 12 provinces, fought 15 major battles, crossed 18 mountain ranges. 90% were dead or scattered, but ones who survived were harder than iron dot. In the caves of Yan, they rebuilt. This time Zhang held the power. The long march had made him, not through Moscow's blessing, but through Chinese blood and Chinese suffering. The intellectuals who doubted him were dead or discredited. What remained was his vision, his will, his party. The foster child of the Bodikot Vode, become what he'd always imagined, not through books or theories, but through the oldest path to power, survival, when others died. He was 42 years old, and he'd just begun. Chapter 10, The Yan Years and the Second United Front, December 1936, music. And China's fate turned on a kidnapping. Zhang Shuiliang, the young Marshal Wo's Manchurian homeland, the Japanese had stolen, couldn't stomach fighting communists, while Japan devoured China. So he took Chiang Kai-shek hostage, held a gun to the general's head, and demanded he fight the real enemy. Stalin sent urgent telegrams from Moscow. Don't kill Chiang. Need him alive to fight Japan, to bleed the Japanese army before it turns north toward Russia. Zhang wanted Chiang dead, but Moscow held the purse strings. So they negotiated. Chiang walked free, and the Second United Front was born. Communists and nationalists would fight Japan together. Supposedly, the war gave Zedong what he needed most, time. While Chiang's armies bled, fighting Japanese regulars, the communists grew in the shadows. They fought too, guerrilla actions behind Japanese lines, but carefully preserving strength for the real war. Everyone knew us coming. Yan'an became their capital, a city of caves carved into yellow cliffs. Foreign journalists arrived, charmed by the Spartan democracy they thought they saw. Edgar Snow wrote Red Star over China, turning Zedong into a global figure. Theromantic, revolutionarying poetry in his cave while building a new world. What Snow didn't see was the rectification campaign 1942, and Zedong decided the party needed purifying. Intellectuals who questioned them found themselves in struggle sessions, confessing imaginary crime suntal. Wang Shiwai, a writer who criticized party privilege, disappeared into a ravine with, make them confess, make them grateful for a make them love their torture, break the mind, rebuild it in your image. The foster child had learned his father's lessons. After all, terror worked, if properly applied. He wrote constantly during these years of protracted war on new democracy, building the theoretical framework for Chinese communism, which looked nothing like Russian communism, but war its musk. The peasants were the sea, thermy fish swimming through them. Revolution came from the countryside, not factories. Marx with kinesecaractistus, though Marx wouldn't have recognized his own ideas. His personal life grew complicated. His vision, pregnant again, broken by long march, grew difficult. Shethru, a bowl at him during dinner with Agnes Smimedley, the American journalist, to gazed at him with worshipful eyes. He, Season, was sent to Moscow for Medik Eltriotand. She'd never returned. as his wife. Her replacement arrived from Shanghai, an actress with a dubious past and ambitious eyes. The party leader saped the match, but Zong didn't ask permission anymore. They married in 1938, his fourth wife, if you counted them all, which nobody did by 1945, when Japan surrendered. The communists controlled base areas with 90 million people, 1 million soldiers under arms, ready for the final struggle. The war against Japan was over. The war for China could finally begin. Chapter 11. The Civil War and the Visito, the Red Mecca, August 1945, and 2 atomic flashes ended the Japanese Empire. Chiang and Zedong circled each other like fighters who'd been waiting too long for this moment. The Americans flew Zong to Chongqing for peace talks. He smiled for photographers, toasted peace with Chiang, then flew back to Yan'an to plan war. The fighting started before the toasts dried. Manchuria first, where Soviet troops had conveniently left Japanese weapons for the communists to find: 700,000 rifles, 14,000 machine guns, enough to arm peasants who'd been sharpening farm tools into spears. Chiang had everything on paper: 4 million troops, American weapons, control of every major city. The communists had 800,000 soldiers and countryside that went dark after sunset. It should have been no contest paper. Warriors usually win paper wars, but Zedong understood something. Chiang didn't. Cities were traps. Let the nationalists gories them, feed them, defend them. Meanwhile, the People's Liberation Army moved through rural China like water, surrounding cities, cutting supply lines, making each garrison a prison of its own making. The nationalist armies rotted from within. Corrupt officers sold weapons to the enemy. Conscripts started by divisions, switching sides for a bowl of rice and land reform promises. By 1948, Chiang's advantage had evaporated. Then Beijing, then the Yangtze. October 1st, 1949, Zedong stood atop Tiananmen Gate, the spot where emperors had proclaimed their mandates. His Hunan accent rang through loudspeakers across the square. The People's Republic of China was born. The peasant boy had conquered an empire. 2 months later, he boarded a train for Moscow. His first time leaving Chittagong to meet Stalin, the Red God himself. The journey took 10 days through Siberian winter. He practiced Russian phrases, rehearsed conversations, prepared to meet his equal. Stalin kept him waiting, put him in a dacer outside Moscow like a prerogative, made him beg for meetings. When they finally met, Stalin treated him like a provincial administrator, not the leader of 600 million people. Every slight was calculated, every humiliation precise. The negotiations dragged through winter. Stalin wanted control of Chinese ports, railways, resources. Wanted China as a buffer, no to partner. Zedong smiled. Agreed to wait, had to. Remembered everything. They signed a treaty of friendship in February 1950. Both men knew it was really a treaty of mutual suspicion. On the train home, Zedong was quiet. Haisates thought he was tired, but he was thinking about power. Real power, fecund, that didn't have to beg for recognition. Stalin had shown him something important. Even communists could be imperialists. Even comrades could be enemies. The foster child of the Bodhisattva met his God and found him wanting time to become his own God instead. Chapter 12. The Great Leap Forward and the Great Famine. 1958. And Song was done with patience. Stalin was dead. Khrushchev was weak. And China still crawled, while it should. He'd visited Moscow again, seen their factories, their bombs. If the Soviets could industrialize in a decade, China could do it in 3 years. Will and mobilized masses. The Great Leap Forward began with numbers that defied reality. China would surpass Britain in steel production by 1972, no, by 1968, actually. Make it 1960. The targets kept rising because nobody dared question the chairman's vision. To doubt was to reveal yourself as artist, and rightists disappeared. 600 million people reorganized overnight into people's communes, private plots, personal chickens, Bicomeko, elective property. Families ate in communal dining halls, thousands stagger, while propaganda team sang songs about abundance that didn't exist. Then came the backyard. Furnaces every commune needed to make. Steel. Peasants who'd never seen a factory. Weary ordered to build furnaces in their courtyards. They fed them with pots, pans, door arc knobs, ancestral bells. The metal they produced was useless, brittle slag. But the numbers looked good, reports to Beijing. Agriculture collapsed first. Millions of farmers were making worthless steel instead of harvesting. Those still farming follow instructions from Moscow-trained scientists who knew nothing about Chinese soil. Plant seeds close together, socialist solidarity, deep plowing for deeper revolution. The crops failed, but the reports claimed record harvests. Local officials, terrified of being purged, reported impossible grain yields. 2,000 pounds per acre became 4,000 pounds. Then 10,000 Zedong believed them because he wanted to. If socialism was scientific, these numbers must be true. Science cold and lie. The state took grain based on the fictional harvests. Villages that supposedly produced 10 tons had to deliver 8 to the cities. It didn't matter that they'd actually ground to. The grain was taken at gun. Peasants who hid food were beaten to death as COUNTERREVOLUTIONARIES. By winter 1959, people were eating bark, then grass, then nothing. Villages went silent, everyone too weak to bury the dead. In Henan province, there were reports of orphans eating children. Officials who reported the famine were purged for spreading capitalist propaganda. Pang Day. The defense minister who'd fought beside Zedong since Jingshan dared to criticize the policies at the Lucan conference. Zedong destroyed him, labeled him a rightist, had him torturing the Cultural Revolution. The message was clear. Truth was whatever the chairman said it was. By 1961, even Zedong couldn't ignore the catastrophe. The policies quiet lighted, but the dying continued. Somewhere between 20 and 45 million people starved to death. The exact number remains unknown. The party still calls it the 3 years of natural diseases. If nature, not politics, had causative famine, the foster child of the Bodhisattva had come death itself, the destroyer of worlds, and he was just getting started. Chapter 13. Unleashing the Cultural Revolution. 1966. And Zong felt power slipping through his fingers like sand. Lu Shaoyi and Deng Xiaoping run the country day to day, undoing his radical policies with their capitalist road reforms. They smiled at him, called him chairman, then ignored his. He was becoming what he feared most, a figurehead, a living monument to someone he used to be. He told Edgar Snow the truth that winter. China needed more personality cult. The cult would be his weapon to destroy the party bureaucrat wad caged him. If the party wouldn't Toby, he'd go around them straight tough youth who'd grown up singing his name. May 16th, the Cultural Revolution, begun with a circular from Beijing bourgeois elements, had infiltrated Thepperty. They must be swept away. But their signal came when his wife, Zhang Qing, attacked a historical playabout, an honest official dismissed by a corrupt emperor. Everyone understood Theplay was about Pong Dai, the emperor's Zong, and criticizing. Zong was now a capital crime. He wrote his own big character poster that July, bombard the headquarters. 3 words that gave Tiananmen to destroy their world. The Red Guards were born. Middle school students with red armbands and littlerd books, drunk on power, no teenager should possess. August 18th, he stood at Tiano, reviewing 1,000,000 Red Guards. A teenage girl pinned a red armband on his sleeve. He asked her name, Song Binbin, meaning gentle and courteous. He smiled, be violent, he told her. She changed her name to Sunhua. Be violent became her identity. The violence came immediately. Teachers beaten to death with belt buckles. Intellectuals forced to kneel on while confessing imaginary crimes. The jet plane position. Arms wrenched behind backs. Until sealders dislocated. Old women with bourgeois hairstyles, their heads shaved with broken glass. Liu Shaohui, once Zedong's chosen successor, was charred in his own home. His children forced to denounce him. He died naked on a concrete floor, his white hair 2 feet long. Denied medicine for diabetes while his screams echoed through Thepperson. Deng Xiaoying's son was thrown from a 4th-floor window, paralyzed it for life. The Red Guards turned on each other by 1967, different factions claiming to be more revolutionary, fighting with machine guns in Guangxi. They literally ate class enemies, cutting out livers and hearts in public feasts to prove their revolution effer. Ancient temples burned, libraries destroyed, the cemetery of Confucius his corpse dug up and hung from a tree. 5,000 years of Chinese civilization, Feto, bonfires by children who thought they were building paradise. By 1968, even Zedong realized the chaos had toned. He sent the Red Guards to Thekentrizide for re-education. Millions of urban youth exiled to villages, their revolution over their futures destroyed. They'd served their purpose. The foster child had become Saturn, devouring his own children. Chapter 14, The Final Years of the Red Emperor. September 1971, and Linbo's plane crashed in Mongolia, carrying Zedong's chosen successor and alleged assassin into the desert sand. Project 571. They'd called the plot 571, sounded like armed uprising in Mandarin. Even coups needed wordplay. The official story kept changing. Lin tried to flee to the Soviet Union. No, he was defecting. Actually, he'd planned to bomb Zhongstrain. The truth hardly mattered. What mattered was that Zhong's close comrade, the man who'd compiled his little red book, had betrayed him. Orban betrayed. Nobody knew anymore. The crash broke something in Zedong. Hedged overnight, stopped reading documents, spent days in bed, staring at. His body was failing. Congestive heart failure made his legs swell like balloons. Lou Gehrig's disease slowly paralyzed his throat. The god was becoming mortal. February 1972, Nixon arrived in Beijing, then a communist crusader, shaking hands with the great helmsman while snow fell in the forbidden city. Zedong could barely stand, but he managed 3 hours, affable sparring, joking about nuclear war while the world held its breath. The meeting was pure calculation. America needed exit from Vietnam. China needed protection from Soviet missiles. 2 enemies embracing because they feared a third enemy more. Kissing gurgled it, realpolitik. Zedong called Ida Sing Barbarinsto, control barbarians, an ancient Chinese strategy. His wife, Jiang Qing, grew bolder as he weakened. She ran Thigong of 4, controlling propaganda, persecuting enemies, preparing Toinharit, his throne. She'd perform revolutionary operas for him while head rolled, unable to speak, blinking once for yes, twice for no. Zhang Yuang, his final mistress, becoming his voice. A train attendant, hedonist, years earlier, now the only person who could understand his garbled speech. She'd lean close to his lips, translate his mumbles into orders that could destroy millions. The empire ruled through a young woman's ears. 1976 arrived with omens. Zhou and Lai died in January. Jude in July. The old revolutionaries disappearing like lights going out. An earthquake trod Tongan, killing hundreds of thousands. Traditional Chinese believed natural disasters meant heaven had withdrawn its mandate. September 8th, he fell into a coma. High organs shut down one by one, while Thigong of 4 and the moderates plotted in adjacent rooms. At 10 minutes past midnight on September 9th, the doctor had to check 3 times. Nobody could believe the immortal Sherman was actually dead. They preserved him like Lenin, pumping him full of formaldehyde, displaying him in a crystal coffin in Tiananmen Square. Millions filed past, weeping for the man who traumatized them, unable to separate their grief from their relief. The foster child of the Bodhisattva returned to his foster mother at last. But instead of compassion, he brought China through every hell heckled imagine. And some, he COULDN, single quotes. Chapter 15. A complicated leggy. The party waited exactly 1 month, October 6, 1976, and Guang had the gang of 4 arrested. Junking screamed about betrayal as they dragged her away. Other trial, she'd say she was only Zedong's dog, barking when he said bark. The court gave her death, commuted tow life. She hanged herself with her own stockings in 1991. That survivor who'd been purged 3 times, sand risen 3 times, he had a simple message. Practice was the sole criterion of truth, not Ma thought, not revolution, just what worked. Within years, he dismantled everything Zedong built while keeping his corpse on display. The official verdict came in 1,981.70% correct, 30% wrong. A mathematical foral for a man who'd caused between 40 and 80 million deaths. They couldn't admit the full horror without admitting Throtty's complicity, so they split the difference, saved face, moved on. But what was that 70%? He'd unified China, yes, ended the century of humiliation that began with British opium ships, made the world's respect a nation it had carved up like When he proclaimed the Republik, China could barely make bicycles when he died. It had hydrogen bombs and satellites. He gave women legal equality, ended arranged marriages. Literacy went from 20% to 65%. Life expectancy doubled despite thefamines. The barefoot doctors he trained brought medicine to villages that had never seen aspirin. These weren't small achievements, yet the price? Those tens of millions starved in the Great Leap Forward, the millions more tortured and killed in the Cultural Revolution, the destroyed families, the ruined minds, the children denounced parents, the parents who buried children, the lost generation sent to the countryside, their futures erased. Today his portrait still watches from Tiananmen Gate, 10 stories tall. That famous mole, that knowing smile. Taxi drivers hang his picture for luck. Peasants pray to his image like a kitchen god. The young by his Merchandishawulika, knowing what he did, or perhaps knowing and not caring, billetried to resurrect his ghost before they imprisoned him for corruption. The New Left quotes him against inequality. Nationalists invoke him against America. Every oniuses his corpse for their purposes, which he might have appreciated. Hellways said political power grew from the barrel of a gun. He never mentioned it also grew from selective memory. The foster child of the body sat left, China powerful and traumatized, unified and broken, modern and afraid of its own history. He wanted to be China's greatest emperor. He succeeded. Emperors aren't loved. They're endured, survived, remembered. Walk through Beijing today, and you'll see him everywhere and nowhere. In Thestrate boulevards, he carved through ancient neighborhoods. In the old people still won't talk about those years. In the capitalism he'd despise, and the nationalism he'd recognize. In the party that rules in his name, while ignoring everything he believed. Epilogue. The Red Emperor's global shadow. While Zhong's body lay crystallized in Beijing, his ghost went traveling. It found fertile soil in places where puberty and rage grew thick as Peru, Nepal, India, the Philippines, wherever peasants had nothing to lose but their lives, which weren't worth much anyway. The shining path erupted in Peru in 1980, just 4 years after his death. Abamal Guzman, a philosophy professor Ruo, called himself Chairman Gonzalo, decided Peru needed its own cultural revolution. His followers hung dead dogs from lemurs lampposts with signs reading, Deng Xiaoing, son of a bitch. They understood the Deng had betrayed the faith. Only pure Maoism could save the world. They started in the poorest region of a poor country, teaching Kitwa-speaking peasants that the story was a spiral moving toward communism. The revolution would be beautiful and terrible, mostly terrible. They massacred entire villages, suspected of government sympathy, stoned children to death for selling cocoa to the wrong buyers. By the time Guzman was captured, 199,270,000 were dead in Nepal. The ghost found Pushpa Kamaldahal, who called himself Prandanda, meaning fierce one. He launched his People's War in 1996. From villages so remote the government target they existed. For 10 years, his fighters controlled rural Nepal, running Maoist courts, Maoist schools, teaching peasants they were the sea in which guerrillas swam. The strange part was that it worked.